The morning started like any other Tuesday at Lake Juniper. The sun was just beginning to paint the sky orange and pink, and the water was calm like glass. I was 63 years old, and I had lived in this quiet Georgia town my whole life. My name is Eleanor, most people call me Ellie, and I'm a widow. My husband, James, passed away 7 years ago, and I had learned to find peace in the silence of my old house on the hill overlooking the lake. That morning, I decided to take my morning walk earlier than usual. The air was crisp and cool, and I wrapped my cardigan around my shoulders as I made my way down the stone path toward the water. I loved this time of day when the world felt like it belonged only to me. The birds were just waking up, and the trees seemed to whisper secrets to each other. But then I heard something that made my heart skip a beat. A car door slammed. I turned and saw my daughter-in-law, Sloane, stepping out of her silver Mercedes. She was my late son Marcus's ex-wife. They had divorced 2 years ago in a messy, painful split. Sloane was beautiful in a sharp way, with dark hair pulled back so tight it made her face look angry. She was wearing sunglasses even though the sun had barely risen, and she was holding something that made my stomach twist with worry. A leather suitcase. A big one. Sloane was breathing hard, like she had been running. Her eyes were wild, scanning the empty beach like she was looking to see if anyone was watching. I quickly stepped behind a large oak tree. I don't know why I hid. Something inside me, some ancient instinct that a grandmother carries, told me that something was very, very wrong. Sloane walked to the edge of the water. Her hands were shaking. Then, with a sound that still echoes in my nightmares, she lifted the suitcase and threw it as far as she could into the lake. The suitcase hit the water with a terrible splash and began to sink. Sloane stood there, watching it disappear beneath the surface. Her chest heaved up and down. She looked around again, and then she got back into her car and drove away so fast the tires kicked up gravel. I stood frozen behind that oak tree. My mind was racing. What was in that suitcase? Why would she throw it into the lake like that? My hands were trembling, and I could feel my heart pounding in my ears like a drum. I don't know what made me do what I did next. Maybe it was because I had lost my husband and my son, and I couldn't bear to lose anything else without knowing why. Maybe it was because there was something in that moment that felt like it involved my family. Whatever it was, I found myself running toward the water. The lake at this point was only about 10 feet deep. I could see the outline of the suitcase below the surface, catching what little light came through the water. Without thinking about my age or my bad knees or how cold the water would be, I waded in. The water was freezing. It took my breath away, and for a moment, I couldn't move. But then I heard something that changed everything. A cry. It was small and thin and heartbreaking. A baby's cry. The sound came from beneath the water, from inside that suitcase. No. No, no, no. I screamed. My old body moved faster than it had in years. I dove into the cold water. My hands found the suitcase handle. My lungs were already burning, and the cold was like 1,000 needles stabbing my skin. I pulled as hard as I could, and the suitcase came loose from whatever had been holding it down. I kicked my legs and pushed myself upward, dragging the heavy, water-filled suitcase with me. My lungs felt like they would explode. My vision was going dark around the edges. And then air. I broke the surface, gasping and choking. I was crying. I was screaming. I was pulling that suitcase toward the shore with strength I didn't know I still had. The baby's cry continued, muffled but desperate, coming from inside. Hold on, baby. Hold on. I cried out to the suitcase, like it could hear me. My feet found the muddy bottom of the lake, and I stumbled toward the beach. Water poured off me and the suitcase. My fingers were so cold they barely worked, but I found the zipper and ripped it open. Inside, wrapped in a soaking wet blanket, was a newborn baby boy. His skin was blue-gray. His little mouth was open, crying weakly now. His eyes were sealed shut. I could see his tiny chest moving up and down, but it was shallow. Barely there. Oh my God, sweetheart, I whispered, and I pulled that baby out of the suitcase and held him against my chest. His skin was so cold, colder than the lake water. His little fingers were like ice. I was 50 years old when my husband died, 63 now, and I thought my days of fighting for life were behind me. I was wrong. I wrapped the baby in my cardigan, the one I had just put on to stay warm, and started running toward my house. The baby was barely crying now, which terrified me more than if he had been screaming. His little body felt so fragile in my arms, like he might disappear into the cold that had stolen into his bones. "Don't you dare leave me," I commanded, and I wasn't talking to the baby. I was talking to God. I was talking to fate. I was talking to whatever force in this universe might be listening. Don't you dare. The walk that usually took me 20 minutes took 5. My wet clothes were already starting to stick to my skin in the morning air. My house loomed ahead of me. The same house where I had lived my whole life, where James had proposed to me on the porch, where Marcus had taken his first steps in the hallway. I burst through the front door and immediately grabbed my phone with shaking hands. 911. I dialed 911. "I need an ambulance." I screamed into the phone. "I have a baby. He's not breathing right. He's freezing. Please." The dispatcher's calm voice asked me questions, but I could barely hear them over the sound of my own terror and the baby's weak cries. An ambulance was on the way. 4 minutes away. 4 minutes. I wrapped the baby in every blanket and towel I could find. I turned up the heat in my house as high as it would go. I did everything I could remember from the one baby CPR class I had taken 20 years ago when Marcus was born. "Come on, sweet boy," I whispered to the tiny baby whose name I didn't know. "Come on. Fight. Just like I'm fighting. We're going to get through this together." And in that moment, watching that baby struggle to breathe, watching his little chest rise and fall, I made a promise. I didn't know who this child was. I didn't know why Sloane had tried to drown him in the lake. I didn't know what darkness had led to this moment. But I knew that I would find out. And I knew that I would do everything in my power to protect this baby. Even if it meant uncovering secrets that could destroy my family. Even if it meant facing down a killer. Even if it meant that at 63 years old, my life was about to change forever. The sirens were getting closer. The baby's cries were getting weaker. And Eleanor Whitlock, a quiet widow from a small Georgia town, was about to become the most determined force in this baby's fight for survival. This story was only just beginning. The emergency room at Lake Juniper Medical Center was a blur of white coats, beeping machines, and urgent voices. I sat in a plastic chair wrapped in a hospital blanket, my wet clothes in a bag at my feet, watching through a glass window as doctors worked on the baby I had pulled from the lake. His tiny body looked even smaller under all those lights and tubes and monitors. A young nurse named Diane came and sat next to me. She had kind eyes and a gentle voice, and she placed a warm cup of tea in my trembling hands. "You saved his life," she said quietly. "If you had waited even 5 more minutes, he would have been gone." I couldn't speak. I just stared at that baby through the glass. He was being warmed slowly. They told me that rewarming him too fast could shock his system. His skin was still pale, almost translucent. Tubes ran from his nose and mouth. His tiny fists were clenched. "Do you know who he is?" Diane asked gently. I shook my head. "No. I don't know anything about him." That's when Detective Ava Johnson walked in. She was tall and sharp-eyed, with dark skin and an expression that told me she had seen terrible things in her life and wouldn't believe me unless I gave her absolute proof. She had a badge on her belt and a small notebook in her hand. "Ms. Whitlock, I'm Detective Johnson. I need to ask you some questions about what happened this morning." The questions came fast.
Where was I?
What time did I see the suitcase? What did the woman look like? Did I get a license plate? Did I see anyone else? Why didn't I call the police instead of pulling the baby out myself? I answered everything as clearly as I could through my shock and exhaustion. I told her about Sloane. I told her about the silver Mercedes. I told her about the terrible sound of that suitcase hitting the water. Detective Johnson's jaw tightened when I said Sloane's name. "Sloane Whitlock," she asked, and I nodded. "She was married to my son Marcus," I explained. "They divorced 2 years ago." She kept his last name. The detective wrote something in her notebook, and I could see her mind working behind her eyes. She knew something. Something important. Ms. Whitlock, I need to be honest with you, she said, sitting down across from me. We're going to need to investigate this thoroughly. That baby is evidence in what might be a very serious crime. We may need to take him into protective custody. My heart stopped. No, I said immediately. No. You can't take him. I'll take care of him. I'll keep him safe. You don't know this child, Detective Johnson said, not unkindly. We don't know his medical history. We don't know his parents. We don't know anything about him yet. Child Protective Services will need to evaluate. I'm his grandmother, I said. The words came out before I even thought them. Detective Johnson's eyes widened. How do you know that? She asked. I don't, I admitted. But that baby was thrown into a lake by his mother. He has no one else. If you have a grandmother willing to fight for a baby, you let that grandmother fight. The detective studied me for a long moment. Then she nodded slightly, like she understood something about loss and protection that only people who have fought for family can understand. 3 days later, the results came back. DNA testing showed that the baby, the tiny boy I had been sitting vigil over in that hospital room, was the biological son of Marcus Whitlock and Sloane Whitlock. My grandson. A child I never knew existed. When the doctor told me, I had to sit down. The room spun around me. Marcus had a child, a son, and Sloane had tried to kill him. But that wasn't the most shocking part. That same day, Detective Johnson came back to the hospital with even more questions. And this time, she brought something that made the blood in my veins turn to ice. Ms. Whitlock, do you remember when your son Marcus died? She asked. Of course I remember, I said quietly. It had been one of the worst days of my life. 2 years ago. A car accident. They said he lost control on the wet road near the bridge. That's what we concluded at the time, Detective Johnson said slowly. But we're reopening that case. We found something in Sloane's financial records that doesn't add up. After Marcus died, she received a life insurance payout of $2 million. And then, 6 months ago, she had a baby, your grandson. I felt the room tilt. She's had him for 6 months? I whispered. And she just tried to. Yes, Detective Johnson said. And here's what we think happened. Marcus made his baby, the one you pulled out of the lake, his sole heir. It's in a will that was filed 6 months ago, right after the child was born. That baby is worth a lot of money, Ms. Whitlock. And Sloane couldn't access any of it as long as he was alive. The detective leaned forward, and her voice became very serious. We think Sloane killed your son. We think she made his car accident look accidental. And we think when she realized the baby would inherit everything, she decided she couldn't keep him around either. I couldn't breathe. My son. My Marcus. He hadn't just died in an accident. He had been murdered by the woman he once loved. And his own child, the baby I had saved, had been meant to be her second victim. The next 2 weeks were the hardest of my life, and I had already lived through losing my husband and my son. While the baby recovered in the hospital, while his little lungs learned to breathe on their own again, while his color returned to his skin, while he grew stronger every single day, I had to fight battles in courtrooms and offices. Child Protective Services came to my house. They looked in my refrigerator. They checked my smoke detectors. They asked me about my income and my health, and whether I had ever been arrested. A social worker named Mrs. Chun looked at me with tired eyes. You're 63, she said, not unkindly. Raising a newborn is demanding. We need to make sure you're capable. I raised a son, I told her. I buried a husband. I buried my child. I dove into a freezing lake and pulled a baby from the darkness. Don't tell me what I am capable of. Mrs. Chun actually smiled at that. Every day, I went to the hospital and sat by that baby's side. I held his tiny hand. I talked to him about his father, about Marcus and the good man he had been, about the dreams he had had for his life that Sloane had stolen from him. I promised that baby that I would tell him stories about his father, that I would keep Marcus alive in his memory, that I would never let him forget where he came from. On the 8th day, The baby opened his eyes and looked at me. Really looked at me. And I knew that this child and I were bound together now by something stronger than blood. We were bound by survival, by love, by the fierce determination that we would both keep going. "Hello, little one," I whispered. "I'm your grandmother, and I'm going to love you for the rest of my life." I named him Elijah. It means my God is Yahweh, and it means strength. Because that baby had the strength to survive what should have killed him. And because I was going to need the strength of something greater than myself to protect him. For weeks after I pulled Elijah from the lake, I was granted temporary custody. The paperwork was signed by a judge in a small courtroom. My hands shook as I held those papers. Temporary, not permanent. But it was a start. Detective Johnson was still investigating. Sloane had disappeared. She wasn't at her house. She wasn't at work. She wasn't anywhere. But Detective Johnson assured me they would find her. "She can run," the detective told me, "but she can't hide forever. Not with the evidence we have. And when we find her, we're going to make sure she pays for what she did to your son. And what she tried to do to Elijah." I brought Elijah home on a Tuesday morning in early spring. The sun was shining. The world was green and fresh and alive. I carried him inside the house where his father had grown up, where my husband had loved me, where my whole life had unfolded. My nurse friend Diane came by with groceries and baby clothes. Reverend Thomas from the church brought a casserole and said a prayer of thanksgiving over us. My neighbors, who had watched me raise Marcus in this same house, came by to meet Elijah and brought gifts and tears and hope. That night, I sat in the old wooden rocking chair that had rocked Marcus to sleep, and I rocked Elijah. He was warm and safe and alive. I could feel his heartbeat against my chest, steady and strong. "We did it, little one," I whispered to him. "We survived the darkness. We made it to the other side." But I knew the story wasn't over yet. Sloane was still out there. The truth about Marcus's death was still being uncovered. And soon, everything was going to come to a head in a way I could never have imagined. Elijah made a tiny sound in his sleep, a small whimper, as if even in his dreams, he remembered the cold. I held him closer and promised him again, I would never let anyone hurt him. I would find the woman who tried to take him from this world. And I would make sure that justice was served. Because that's what grandmothers do. We protect. We fight. We love with a fierceness that can move mountains. And Eleanor Whitlock was about to show Sloane Whitlock exactly how fierce a grandmother's love could be. Don't forget to like this video, subscribe to our channel, and share this incredible story with your friends. Your support means everything to us. 6 weeks after I brought Elijah home, Detective Johnson called me at 6 in the morning. "We found her," she said simply. "Sloane is in Charleston. We're moving in today." I hadn't slept much in those 6 weeks. Every night, I lay awake listening to Elijah's breathing, making sure he was still alive, still fighting, still here. My heart had learned to race at the smallest sound. My mind had become obsessed with one thing: justice. "I want to be there," I told the detective. "Absolutely not," she said firmly. "This is a police operation. You'll stay home with Elijah." "Then let me help," I said. "You need to get her to confess, don't you? She'll confess to me. She'll want to explain herself. Let me help." There was a long silence on the other end of the line. "I'll call you back," Detective Johnson finally said. 3 hours later, she did. The plan was risky, and Detective Johnson made that very clear. I would wear a hidden microphone. We would arrange to meet Sloane at an old boathouse by the lake, the same lake where she had tried to commit 2 murders. I would record her confession. And the moment she admitted to throwing Elijah into the water or to anything involving Marcus's death, Detective Johnson's team would move in. "If anything goes wrong," the detective said, looking me straight in the eye, "if she becomes violent or if she tries to run, you get out. You don't play hero. You hear me?" I nodded, but we both knew I would do whatever it took to protect Elijah and get justice for Marcus. That afternoon, I called Sloane. I had gotten her number from old emails I found from when she was still married to Marcus. My hands were shaking as I dialed. She answered on the fourth ring. Sloan? It's Ellie. Eleanor Whitlock. There was a pause. What do you want? She said coldly. I want to talk to you, I said, keeping my voice steady. About Elijah. About what happened. I don't know what you're talking about, she said. Yes, you do, I said. And I think you want to tell someone the truth. I think you want someone to understand why you did what you did. I'm listening, Sloan. I'm willing to listen. Another long pause. Then, fine. Meet me at the old boathouse by Mill Creek. Tonight. 8 o'clock. And come alone. She hung up. I spent the afternoon with Elijah. I held him. I fed him. I changed his diaper. I kissed his forehead 100 times. I looked at his tiny face and saw Marcus in his features, in the shape of his eyes, in the curve of his mouth. Your mother is going to prison today, I whispered to him. And your father's killer is going to face what she's done. You're going to grow up safe, sweetheart. I promise you that. At 7:15 p.m., Detective Johnson arrived at my house to fit me with the microphone. It was tiny, smaller than a button, and it clipped under my collar. She showed me how to tap it 3 times if I needed immediate help. Remember, she said, you're just a grandmother who wants answers. Don't accuse her of anything. Let her talk. People who've done terrible things want to talk about it. They carry the weight. You just give her room to let it out. I drove to the boathouse alone. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of red and purple. The lake was calm, just like it had been the morning I found Elijah. The boathouse loomed ahead of me, old and wooden and full of shadows. Sloan was waiting inside. She was wearing dark clothes, and she looked different than I remembered. She looked smaller somehow, like guilt had been slowly eating away at her from the inside. Her eyes were hollow. Her hands were shaking. Hello, Sloan, I said quietly. Don't, she said immediately. Don't try to be nice to me. Don't pretend this is a conversation between 2 people who loved the same man. Did you love him? I asked. She laughed, a terrible, broken sound that echoed through the boathouse. Love, she repeated. I didn't love Marcus. I loved what Marcus had. His family money. His family name. His life insurance policy worth $2 million. My hands clenched into fists, but I kept my voice calm. Tell me, I said. Tell me what happened. And she did. Sloan told me how Marcus had started to pull away from her. How he'd realized she didn't really love him. How he'd filed for divorce and changed his will to protect any children they might have had. How she'd become furious that she wouldn't get the money she felt she deserved. So you killed him, I said. It wasn't a question. It was easy, she said, and there was pride in her voice. Sick, twisted pride. I cut his brake lines. It looked like an accident. Everyone believed it was an accident. And I got the life insurance money. I could feel my heart pounding. The microphone was recording every word. But then he got me pregnant, Sloan continued. That stupid baby. He was supposed to be my way to more money. But then I realized I didn't want him. I didn't want a baby. I wanted freedom. I wanted my life back. And that baby was just going to ruin everything. So you try to kill him, I said. I try to solve the problem, she said. I threw him in the lake where no one would find him, where he'd just be another tragedy, another accident. And then I could move on with my life. But I found him, I said quietly. And now Elijah is safe. And you're going to prison. Sloane's face contorted with rage. She lunged toward me, her hands reaching for my throat. That's when I tapped the microphone 3 times. Within seconds, the boathouse doors burst open. Detective Johnson and 5 uniformed officers rushed in. Sloan screamed and tried to run, but they tackled her to the ground. She fought and thrashed and wailed like an animal, but within moments, she was in handcuffs. Detective Johnson helped me up. You did good, she said. She killed my son, I whispered. She murdered him. I know, Detective Johnson said gently. And now she's going to pay for it. The trial lasted 3 weeks. Sloane's lawyers tried everything they could to prove reasonable doubt, but the evidence was overwhelming. the cut break lines, the life insurance money, her confession, which was now admissible in court because I had been wearing a wire and she had knowingly admitted her crimes, the attempted murder of a newborn. On the final day, the jury took only 3 hours to return a verdict.
Guilty.
On all counts, the judge sentenced her to life in prison without the possibility of parole. When he read the sentence, I felt Marcus's presence in that courtroom. I felt his spirit finally able to rest, knowing that his killer had been punished. But the real victory came 6 months later, when a family court judge signed the papers making me Elijah's permanent guardian. Not temporary.
Permanent.
You are his legal guardian, the judge said, looking at me over her glasses. This court recognizes your brave actions in saving this child's life and your unwavering commitment to his well-being and future. Congratulations, Ms. Whitlock. You have a grandson. I held those papers, and I cried. Happy tears. Healing tears. Tears that washed away the darkness of the past year and made room for hope. Elijah is 3 years old now. He has his father's eyes. He has his father's laugh, a beautiful, bright sound that fills my house with joy every single day. He doesn't remember anything about that terrible day by the lake. He doesn't carry those memories of cold and darkness. He only knows love and safety and a grandmother who would walk through fire for him. I tell him stories about his father, about Marcus and how he loved music and football and reading books under the big oak tree in our backyard. I keep Marcus's memory alive for Elijah so that even though he never got to meet his father, he knows who Marcus was. He knows he came from goodness. Every morning, Elijah and I walk down to Lake Juniper together. He picks flowers and points at birds and talks about everything he sees in that beautiful, innocent way that only children can. And I watch him, this miracle of a boy who survived something no child should ever have to survive. And I thank God every single day that I went on that morning walk, that I was in the right place at the right time, that I listened to my grandmother's instinct. Diane, my nurse friend, comes by every Sunday with cookies and stories. Reverend Thomas stopped by last week to say a prayer of thanksgiving for how far we've come. Even Detective Johnson visits sometimes, and Elijah calls her detective friend and shows her his toys. The lake that once held darkness now holds memories of healing. I sit on the bench where I first saw Sloan that terrible morning, and I watch my grandson laugh and play, and I know that love has won. Marcus is at peace. Sloan is paying for her crimes. And Elijah, beautiful, brave, resilient Elijah, is home. The final truth. At 63 years old, I thought my life was behind me. I thought the best years of my story had already been written. But I learned that it's never too late to fight. It's never too late to love. It's never too late to make a difference in someone's life. I learned that grief can transform into purpose. That fear can transform into courage. That loss can transform into legacy. When I pulled Elijah from that cold lake, I didn't just save a baby. I saved myself. I found a reason to keep living. I found a reason to fight. I found a reason to believe that the world still has goodness in it, even when it seems dark. So here's what I want you to know. If you see injustice, speak up. If you see a child in danger, do something. If you have love in your heart and strength in your bones, use it. Don't wait for someone else to save the day. Be the person who saves the day. Because that's what I did. And I would do it 1,000 times over. That baby, now my grandson, taught me that one person can change everything. That one moment can redirect an entire life. That one act of courage can ripple out and touch the lives of everyone around you. Elijah is asleep upstairs in his bedroom right now. He's warm. He's safe. He's loved beyond measure. And I will protect that boy with everything I have until the day I die. Because I am his grandmother. And there is nothing, absolutely nothing, in this world stronger than a grandmother's love. Thank you so much for watching. If this incredible true story moved your heart, please like this video, subscribe to our channel, and share it with everyone you know. Stories like this deserve to be heard. And remember, never underestimate the power of one person's courage to change the world. What did you think of Eleanor's story? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. We read every single one. See you in the next video.